Well, let me get started here. I've introduced myself as the president of New St. Andrews College, and so that means my world of reference is the world of colleges and universities, particularly the subset of private Christian colleges. And I spend a lot of time visiting ACCS schools. I spend quite a lot of time on the road, and I'm happy to visit any of your schools or really enjoy spending time in the ACCS schools throughout the U.S. But the truth is, I'm not a K through 12 educator. I visit you, but I'm not in your world. So as I speak, my frame of reference really is from the college level. So I'm going to talk about freedom at the college level, but I think that there are two ways in which this has real meaning for you. First of all, I don't think the K-12 education that you've committed yourself is the completion of the work that you really want to see done. I think that the work you want to see done actually, in really important ways, needs to press on through the college level. And so I want to encourage you to be thinking about what it looks like to send your students off to college. But second of all, I think that there are a number of ways in which the lessons that I'm describing at the college level are actually really pertinent and relevant for you at the K-12 level. I think that there are equivalent temptations and pitfalls for you that have really tripped up a number of our colleges. And so I think there are a couple of different ways in which this relates. Now, let me grant all of Dr. MacArthur's concerns about the various statistics that are out there. Nevertheless, I'm going to trust that you will not fall into the temptations and mistakes that he described there, so I'm going to still throw some statistics at you. A recent Barna survey, approximately 70% of those students that were engaged in church activity in high school have ceased being engaged in church by the end of their freshman year in college. Southern Baptist denomination did a survey, and it revealed they lose somewhere between 70 and 88% of their students in the first year of college. A Pew Research survey says that a college degree means that you are less likely to be serious about your faith than if you just have a high school degree. As you move into college, you are moving more and more into a world that is hostile to your faith and that is likely to cause you to fall away from the faith. And if you look at these surveys, the average is somewhere along the lines out of 3 out of 4 of the students walking out of their home church as they graduate their senior year in high school are not going to be attending church by the end of their freshman year and cease thinking of themselves as Christian. They're walking away from the faith. 3 out of 4 is a pretty incredible rate. I mean, that's some pretty serious carnage. And my point here is that the college campus then, including Christian colleges, and sadly, including a lot of our Christian colleges, is a very, very dangerous place. To give you a visual image to maybe think about this for a moment, you would have a better chance of taking your graduating class from your school and putting them in the boats for the Normandy Beach invasion and having them survive that than you would sending them off to college in America now. That's a pretty terrifying thought. And we cringe at the idea of one, and we take very casually the idea of the other. We don't even think about it in a lot of ways. We think it's just what you have to do. And yet one is just your mortal life. The other is your eternal soul. So which one is more important? And I think the difficulty is that many of us had a very positive experience during our college years in the midst of what was probably a hostile environment to your faith. I remember as a college student, I remember being in the class where this teacher was saying something that I knew as a Christian I had to stand up and object to, and you get all the fear and everything, and then finally have to go ahead and say something, and that was a really formative moment for me. I can remember all of the things that were going on in my dorm. I can remember, like the night when one entire floor of the dorm dropped acid all at once, and all chaos breaks loose. I can remember all of those kinds of things, and so when people say, well, the college is hostile, it's a secular environment, well, that's what it was when I was there, and yet I found college to be that testing of my faith actually really established me in really important ways that I'm grateful for now. But what happens is I tend to project that onto what current students are facing. And that's all of our temptation, is we think that, yeah, it was hard, but it was actually good for you. And that's what people are describing when they say that the college environment is hostile. It's not that anymore. It's a completely different world. It's a completely different world. And the level of hostility is so ratcheted up and is so out of proportion. It's not what we all faced. It's a completely different situation. And those statistics bear testimony to that. I would challenge you as educators in your schools to do a hard look at your alumni after 2 years of college, or 5 years and 10 years after graduation. Do a survey where you really try to actually do the numbers and say, how happy are we with the maturity of their faith 5 years out, 2 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out? And just be kind of brutally honest with yourself and say, how happy are we with this? Or do we tend to, which is, I think this is the temptation we all fall into, do we tend to pick a few anecdotal testimonies that favor the narrative that we want, and we kind of push those to the front and ignore the hard numbers that bear witness to a very different and very disappointing truth? Are you happy with your long-term results? Or is the hard work that you've done at K-12 being undone by a college education? My guess is that the results that you will find are better than most of the other schools. I'm guessing that you are not we lose 3 out of 4. I'm guessing that's describing a much more less serious about their faith environment that they came from. I'm betting you do much better than 3 out of 4, and I'm betting that you do nowhere near as well as you wish you were doing. Somewhere between those two. Nowhere near as well as you wish you were doing, and better than 3 out of 4 falling away. That's probably where you fall in, and I do think it's worth taking a look and really evaluating that. So what I'd like to do is outline 3 ways in which I believe higher education has become significantly compromised. And my goal here is twofold. First, I think that what's happened at the college level should serve as a cautionary tale for your schools. I think that these are all temptations that you could fall into. Don't let this happen to you. And second, because I want you to understand what's happening at the college scene, because I don't think we really have recovered the lost tools of learning until we have pushed the hard work that you're doing now up into the college level. It's not done yet. All right, we have a whole other battle that we still need to fight. And I'll talk about why those years are so significant and when we get towards the end of this. But our tendency is to think we've laid the foundation with this K-12 education. Our work is done. We send them off to college. I just don't think that is the case. I think that we're having a lot of your work undone at the college level because we're not being critical about what's happening at the college level. Until we have a system of colleges that is as committed to this vision as you are, we're going to hand over our graduates to a system that is committed to undoing all your hard work. Now, 2 disclaimers as I move forward, just 2 really important disclaimers. And the thing is, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the disclaimers and qualifiers because I'm going to say some pretty strong things, and the tendency is to want to give all of the qualifiers that are necessary and are true, but you give so many qualifiers that you miss the point that you're really trying to hammer home. And so I want to spend more time hammering home and less time qualifying. Nevertheless, I do want to put these out there just so that I have a footnote that I can appeal to when somebody's outraged afterwards, and I can say, I did put that in there. And the first one is this, and I think it is really important. I don't think college is for everyone. I just don't. I think that that's a wrong-headed view. College is not for everyone. Lots of people ought not to go to college. They have wonderful callings elsewhere, and it is not something God frowns upon. It is not them failing to achieve. I don't think college is for everyone. I think it's a specific thing for a specific cause, and to make it something that is the expectation for everybody's future twists people, and is just a bad idea. So I don't think college is for everyone. And then second, although you will no doubt see a great similarity between what I am describing and what my college is doing, coincidentally. So New St. Andrews College will be in a lot of ways an embodiment of what I'm describing. Let me just also say I don't believe that NSA is for everyone. We are not, just as college is not a one-size-fits-all, NSA is not a one-size-fits-all. We're for a very particular kind of audience, and there are just a lot of folks that should not go to NSA. They need to go somewhere else to get the academic training that they want, and I don't want to pretend that there's some sort of failing if you don't end up at NSA. So those are my qualifiers that are behind everything, and if you start to feel outraged, just make sure that you have heard those two things. So I've arranged my argument as three freedoms. There are three freedoms that I think are critical, and the reason for this is that we are hearing more and more now that college and education ought to be free. If you remember in the last election, our friend Bernie Sanders, one of his main talking points was that college should be free and that it's actually immoral. I don't know where he got the morality standard here, but it's actually immoral for college to not be free. That we're sinning against our nation when we have not made college free. But the argument I want to make, though, is that it's interesting to use that word or that concept of free or freedom, because when you talk to America and you talk to Americans, freedom is actually a very, very powerful concept. This is something that runs very deep, and we have some pretty strong feelings and sentiments about the importance of freedom. And particularly as Christian Americans, that word means something very deep and very profound. And I find it interesting that in saying that college should be free, we've picked, I believe, the cheapest, lowest, and most trivial definition of the word free in order to describe the freedom of the education. So in Bernie's understanding, for a college to be free means somebody else picked up the bill. Okay, it means I went in, I ate the pizza, I snuck out, and somebody else had to cover the expenses of my meal. That's freedom. And I would think that it would be a pretty sad thing if in America we started taking that definition of free and using that for what we meant when we said that something should be free. Because I think that if we take that slogan that college should be free and we push it a little bit and we kind of dive a little bit deeper into what freedom really looks like, I think we'll find some actually far more profound implications for what ought to be happening in our education. And you, I know, are people who have already made this sacrifice to start schools that you fund, and you work and sacrifice and give to fund while paying the property taxes that picks up somebody else's bill for their free education, okay? So this is a sacrifice that you live day in, day out. This is your world that you have made this sacrifice to give a deeper level of freedom other than somebody else picks up the tab. It's something that I think at the college level we have failed to do. We really have failed deeply, and I think we are a really great cautionary tale to explain why it is that you're making the sacrifice that you're making. What's happening at the college level reveals why it's so important that you do it the way that you're doing it. So what I want to do is I want to walk through the three freedoms that I'm describing. And the first is a level of financial freedom. And to do that, I just need to step kind of behind the curtain and describe briefly kind of the financial model and some of the inner workings of what's going on in the financial model for most private colleges. And notice that I'm looking at the private colleges. I'm not looking at the state universities. So that would be another talk and another. I would have to lay out a slightly different model, but the private one is a little more surprising because we think of private colleges just as we think of your private school as something that's being funded by the tuition checks from mom and dad, which is really not the case. Now, the interesting thing is in the past 30 years, the increase in cost of higher education has doubled the increase of the cost in healthcare. So over the last 30 years, as healthcare costs have climbed, higher education, college costs have climbed at double that rate. We have outpaced education increases 2 to 1. Now, you could see how there's a bit of a similarity between healthcare and university life. Both rely on a credentialed personnel, a highly credentialed personnel, in order to run it. You've got two types of doctors and graduate study that really equips both worlds. You also could see how they both rely on expensive facilities. A hospital versus, say, a chemistry lab at a university, similar cost per square footage, although the university has all kinds of space that does not have that level of cost. So I think actually the university should be cheaper than the hospital. Yet, education costs have skyrocketed compared to healthcare. And I think we can all say over the last 30 years, have you seen an improvement in your healthcare? I'm extremely grateful for all the innovations in healthcare over the last 30 years that are pretty tangible. You can point to all the different things that we get to have now that we didn't have 30 years ago, for which I'm intensely grateful. I'm not sure that I could say the same thing for the quality of college education over the last 30 years. What is so much better about college now than 30 years ago? What is so much more rigorous, so much more advanced? I'm not sure that we could point to that. So why is it then that college is not only increasing at the same pace as healthcare, but actually doubling it, outpacing it? Now, you need to remove from this one illusion, and this is really important because I think this is something that is deceptive and it's played on your college recruiters and whatnot. The typical tuition of a private Christian college is going to be in the low 30s, let's say $33,000, $34,000 annual. That's tuition, not room and board, but just tuition. It's going to be in the low 30s. However, you need to understand that across the board, almost all of these schools practice something called discounting, which is where they will give you a massive scholarship, and when you apply, and what you find out is if you dig in behind the scenes, you'll find that scholarship is not actually a funded scholarship. They don't have an endowment that is funding that scholarship. Those dollars are not real. There's not a donor that has paid that. There's not an alumni association funding it. There's not an endowment that is funding it. All that has happened is they have discounted their tuition by a significant amount, and they tend to discount at about 50%. Okay, so half the tuition is just going to be knocked off, and you think, by doing this, there's sort of a double whammy that happens to you, which is first of all, you believe that you just got accepted to a really prestigious school. How do you know it was prestigious? Well, it cost $35,000 a year to go there. That's how I know it was prestigious. And second of all, apparently this incredibly selective, highly prestigious college is so impressed by me that they're willing to give me $18,000 annually, that they're just going to give to me to go there. And so they get the benefit of appearing super exclusive and prestigious, and also this real sort of cited kind of, but you are special, right? As they give you this scholarship. It was never $35,000, it was always an $18,000 tuition. You're getting the standard price that everybody is getting. It's like the sweater that says it was $250 and today it's only $70 and you just feel like you have to get it. It has never in its life ever sold for $250, okay? And it's the same with the tuition. Very few people are actually paying that tuition. So subtract discounting out of it. You got to get that out of it. And let's just go with the actual numbers. Why are those numbers still so radically inflated? And the most obvious reason has been the significant increase in government funding. This is what it is that free money from the federal government has radically inflated the price of tuition. In 2016, $43 billion were awarded in federal grants, Pell Grants, and another $95 billion in federally subsidized student loans. As the government has begun throwing money at colleges, it is not surprising that colleges have suddenly started believing that they cost a lot more. I was in a meeting very recently. It was a room of about 25 to 30 college presidents, private Christian schools, and the question was, why have our prices gone up so much? And somebody said, well, is it the fact that we get so much federal money? Is that why it's going up? And the room was kind of incensed, and it was sort of, the conversation was silenced, and we just moved on. It was like, no, it just costs us much. Everybody be quiet, we're moving on. And we go on to something else. They just did not want to examine that question. But the simple fact is, everybody knows when you go to a business deal, you do not leave money on the table. Right? You do not, that's kind of like number one rule of doing a financial deal. If I am selling a car and I am planning on asking $10,000 for it, and you come in and I know you want it, and I find out that you were planning on paying $15,000 and you have $15,000 with you, the price just changed to $15,000. Okay? It's called not leaving money on the table. You don't walk away when somebody was ready to pay more. They were ready to pay more, and you didn't charge that amount. Okay, and so when we come to setting tuition prices, If the cost was $12,000, but I know that you actually can take out you can get $6,000 in a Pell Grant, and also you're willing to take out another $8,000 in a student loan, well, guess what? The tuition just went up. The tuition just went up. And that is a big part of why tuition has skyrocketed, is because there's all of this federal money that has inflated the pricing. In 2009, the federal government owned less than $150 billion in outstanding debt from student loans. As of 2016, that number is $1.5 trillion. Okay, from 2009 to 2016. 2009 is $150 billion. 2016, $1.5 trillion. Okay, that's $1.5 trillion in 2016. I don't even know what it is right now. But $1.5 trillion that the government owns in our student loan debt. Think of Joseph's move on the Egyptians. It's currently being run on us. We owe our government. We're in deep. The average graduate is currently walking out of college owing $37,000. And don't underestimate the impact that has for the kinds of decisions they make as they graduate from college and plot their initial steps in life. Okay, if you are at all involved in giving marriage counsel to college students as they're thinking about if they're ready to be married, if they're ready to have kids, all right, then you know student debt is probably one of the largest factors in the determinations that they're making. People don't get married, people don't have kids, people don't start families, there's all kinds of things they won't do because they have a student loan hanging over them, and they feel like they are enslaved to that and not capable of making the decisions they know that they should be making because they owe this massive amount. Or think about how many people are not choosing careers in ministry or in service industries such as your schools. I mean, how many people would love to teach in an ACCS school, would love to teach in your classroom, but can't because you can't pay them much, all right? You know that you're all sacrificing to be there, and they don't have room to make that kind of sacrifice because they're floating 40 grand in student loan debt, and so they're not able to do it. Okay, that debt is steering our life decisions and causing us to not choose the paths that we really know we ought to be choosing because we're trying to carry that debt. And the sad thing is, I don't think that this increased spending has gone towards a significantly improved education. It's instead funded two things: bureaucratic bloat, as it's really just shocking looking at the explosion in administrative space in universities and colleges. The administrations have just taken over and grown at up to 5 times the size of the faculties because of all this perceived need for now various virtue signaling offices and services that the university is supposed to provide, or who knows what. But you've got this massive bureaucratic bloat combined with what's been described as the amenities arms race. It's the amenities arms race, which is the attempt to put so much bling on your campus, sort of architectural bling and then that's what you use to recruit students to the space. So as a friend was recently pointing out, if you go and visit a campus, what you'll be walked through is not the classrooms, you'll be walked through the amenities bling. Okay, you'll be walked through the climbing wall, the athletic center. There was a great, everybody was all up in outrage over LSU putting in this lazy river. I can't remember how many millions of dollars they spent on a lazy river that spells out LSU. And so you've got hundreds of millions of dollars going into this massive remodel, and part of it is this lazy river. So you're taking out 40 grand in student loans so that you can float in the lazy river through the campus. These are things that have nothing to do with the actual academic experience. What they're there for is the actual recruitment pitch. So you're going in debt to pay for the bling that was just to attract you to the school and not to provide you with an actual education. But the most alarming consequence of all of the government money is the fact that there are always strings attached to this kind of money. And this is the thing that people don't want to admit is there, but this is what happens. You can't take the king's money without becoming the king's man. You can't take the federal money without now obligating yourself to follow a whole host of federal mandates. Under the Obama administration, Obama used Title IX as a way of requiring all kinds of things of colleges that took federal money. And they came out in these things called the Dear Colleague letters that started describing the policies that these schools had to have for their students, that started to put Christians in a very compromising position. And this is when you start to have questions about what our restrooms have to look like. What kind of counsel do you have to give when somebody is struggling with sexual sin? What kind of counsel are you required to give? What do your dorms have to look like? What kinds of things can you ask of your faculty with regard to statement of faith? These are all really essential things that go into the DNA of the school that create the atmosphere of either faithfulness or unfaithfulness. And because that money was attached to these things, you start to see all kinds of compromise. One of the real scares that we had 2 years ago in California, SB 1146 was a bill that was put forward that was going to require anybody that took Cal Grant money, which is a significant grant. This is a state level grant, but it's something that many of the schools absolutely depend on to make ends meet. And it was going to attach definition of marriage and gender identity and all of that to that money. You could not take the money if you held to a Christian position on definition of marriage or sexuality or anything like that. It was, at the last minute, it was edited so that all the teeth were taken out of it, but it hovers on the brink of something like that coming through again. And I would say that we're, the current Trump administration, no matter what your opinions are on the Trump presidency, you have to admit that the implications for freedom within education have been tremendous. It has been a really blessed time right now, but I don't know how long you can expect it to last and how strong you can expect the whiplash to be in another 2 years. So it's a very sort of tenuous position that we're in. These are the big challenges that we're looking at, but countless more subtle changes have already worked their way through the bureaucracy as colleges are desperately trying to stay kosher with regard to federal money. I was at one meeting where a president of a significant Christian college is describing to us a problem they'd had with sexual assault. And so the solution was spending millions of dollars teaching all of their students how to have consensual sex. And that was it. We're putting millions of dollars into teaching our students how to have consensual sex. And it was tragic because when you'd say, why not teach them the gospel and the biblical ethic? And there's this thing that the Bible talks about, like there's another solution to this. And her answer was, don't be naive. It's just naive. That's not going to work. We have to teach them how to have consensual sex. And this is coming out of having to follow these federal mandates. I think of another school that you would think of as a very conservative evangelical school that will not practice discipline against practicing homosexual students that are in violation of their code of conduct. They're practicing homosexual students and they're doing it flagrantly. The school is terrified to act on it because what it could cost them with regard to the federal money and all of the various ways in which they're encumbered by federal administration. And this is the thing, you have to understand the size of the federal money and its impact within the financial package of these schools. Private Christian colleges get more money from the federal government than they do from tuition checks from mom and dad. Okay, the money that they get from the federal government is larger than what they get from mom and dad. Now, you don't notice that at first because it tends to come as Pell Grants and subsidized student loans, which means it's entered as tuition. It looks like a tuition check as it comes in, but once you break apart these tuition checks, you find that more is coming from the federal government than is coming from mom and dad, which is to say it would be easier for these schools, private schools, not public schools, the private schools, it would be easier for private schools to cut tuition than it would be for them to cut federal money, okay? That's where they are. That's why this is such a hard thing for them to try to give up, because you're asking them to give up something that's even larger than the tuition they bring in annually. So go back to that question of Bernie and free. Has federal funding made college free? Has government money made our education freer? by asking the government to fund and give us the money to cover the cost of our education, do we find ourselves as free men and women, or do we find ourselves encumbered as slaves? Okay? You see how I think this is a really deceptive move when the government is looking to fund these things, to portray it as free, when the great irony is I think that we end up actually much more deeply enslaved. Let me look at another crisis in education. This is a little bit more, I think, philosophical, and that is the question of what is an education for? What is an education for? Why do you go to school? Why do you, after you finished high school, continue on in college and choose another 4 more years that you're going to pay for? Why do you do that? What is an education for? And increasingly, at the college level at least, the answer that is being given, and this is, I think, a shift that has happened over the last 50 years in how we think about what a college education is for, is that previously we saw college education as a particular kind of training for our cultural leaders. That was what a college was supposed to sort of distinguish out your cultural leaders and give them this kind of particular exclusive education that gave you the skills of cultural leadership. But what's happened is education has shifted to be more and more about jobs. You go to college to get a particular job. Your education is about a job. You'll find all of your parents are pushing you to be getting more vocationally specific classes within your curriculum because they say, what is the point of learning Latin? You're never going to run into a Roman centurion and need to ask him for directions to the restroom. So why are you doing that? Shouldn't you be teaching them PowerPoint or Excel or some sort of coding language? Or shouldn't you be giving them these vocational skills? Why are you focusing on all these really bizarre categories that seem kind of impractical? The primary difference of old between the kind of education that you gave at the college level and then those that didn't get that education, it was the difference between cultural leadership and employment. So think for a moment of the primary difference between an officer and an enlisted man. In the military, what is the difference between an officer and an enlisted man? An officer is intended to lead, whereas an enlisted man is intended to follow orders very carefully. An officer was given a college education, and that was the thing that distinguished the officer from the enlisted man, is he had to have had a college education and then could enter in as an officer. And he was the one with the shiny things on the collar that you saluted. And the enlisted man was an 18-year-old with no real significant higher education who went in to be told what to do. And I can say this without taking sides here, because I enlisted in the Marine Corps at 18 and spent my time as an enlisted man. And I'm not insulted by the idea that, yes, as an enlisted man, my job was to take orders and to do exactly what I was told. I should not have been given any more authority. I was not worth it. All right, and the kinds of instruction that you got as an enlisted man was very formulaic. It was always a certain set of steps that you had to memorize and had to follow with precision. I can still recite some of the steps that I had to follow with regard to how to take a guard command or taking apart M16. There's certain, and you just went through step after step after step. And you were not expected whatsoever to have independent thought. Nobody wanted to hear your independent thought, your creative solution that was outside, of the envelope that nobody considered before. Nobody wanted that. What they wanted you to say, yes, sir, and to go exactly where you were told. I mean, they were training you to be ready to charge the machine gun nest without questioning the order. A little bit of creative thinking would probably see this as maybe not the best idea. And so they needed us to follow orders. So it was a very particular kind of education, following steps, okay? Officers are given a very different kind of education. They're being taught to think independently, to think quickly, critically, to be able to see a situation, come up with a problem very quickly, and then to be able to command and direct others and compel them with their words to do frightening things, right? That's what an officer was being trained to do. Two very, very different kinds of education, one for those that would follow and one for those that would lead. Our college education then was an elite kind of education for leaders. But our egalitarian age has not liked that idea and has wanted to flatten that and say, no, college is for everyone. But in doing that, they have emptied this path of education from all its real power. It's no longer that kind of education. We've demanded that college be for everyone. Once again, think of Bernie's demand free college for everyone. But this has resulted in a significant change in how we think about education in general, and it's filtered down to you and to the world that you're working in. This whole change is affecting you in all kinds of ways. Now, education is crafted around a particular kind of job. College is about vocational job training now. So it's the funniest thing because New St. Andrews, we only offer one degree, one undergraduate degree, and the degree is in liberal arts and culture. So our undergraduate, we have different master's degrees, but our undergraduates walk off with one BA in liberal arts and culture. And so the joke is always, all of these students are like going home for Thanksgiving and having the uncle, that one uncle at Thanksgiving saying, you're getting a degree in liberal arts? What do you do with a degree in liberal arts? And then, you get a job as a liberal artist. Who's employing that, right? Where is that job category? And it's funny because we have this subtle presupposition that's snuck in that the name of your undergraduate degree needs to correspond with the job that you're going to get. And we evaluate everyone's majors based on that. Does your name sound like a good job? And that's how we evaluate college. And the thing that's so funny is if you just think about that for just half of a second, you could see how absurd that is. If we go just anecdotally around the room here and ask how many of you, what's the name of your undergraduate degree, what's the job that you currently have, do they match up? For, I would say at least 3/4 of you, it does not match up anymore and hasn't matched up for a long, long, long time. My undergraduate degree was chemistry education. I haven't touched a test tube since I walked out of graduation. In no way does my undergraduate degree title line up with my job. That's not to say I don't value my undergraduate degree. I got a lot out of it, but it wasn't for those reasons. What happens is education has become increasingly thought of as being about vocational training. And so now we think less about becoming educated men and women, and instead we think of ourselves as being certified for certain tasks or skills. Okay, you get that? Even just the concept of what it means to be educated. Do we even think about that anymore? To be an educated man, to be an educated woman. What does that look like? And we have lost a value for having become educated, and we think more and more now about having become certified for certain tasks. Okay? And we think of all of education being about certifying you for certain tasks rather than creating an educated person who's capable of cultural leadership. And the difference between these two categories, I think, is both subtle and yet really, really profound. And I hope that you think about this as you shape your curriculum and think about what you're doing with your students at home. Are you educating them or certifying them? Are they educated or certified? If you're certified, you're qualified to perform a list of tasks associated with a certain career. Okay? If you're certified, you're qualified to perform a list of tasks associated with a certain career. Think of myself as a young Marine. I was a tank crewman. So all of my steps, everything I learned had to do with operating an M1A1 tank. And I had all of these little tasks that I had committed to memory for how this thing functioned and how you worked it. Okay, but it was a certain set of tasks that I was qualified and certified to perform. But if you're educated, as opposed to certified, you're trained to think broadly and critically about a whole host of matters. Okay, they did not want me to think about poetry as I worked on the tank. They did not want me to think about the implications of language as I worked on the tank. They wanted me to think about step 1, step 2, step 3, and now go back to step 1 and again and again and again. Whereas when you're educated, you're thinking more broadly. You're thinking about the entirety of God's creation. You're thinking creatively, and you're thinking critically. You're questioning the things that you've been told. Nobody wanted me to question over here. Over here, they want you to question. They want you to push back. You want your students to say, what you just said doesn't seem like that fits with what you said earlier, okay? You're training people to be critical like that. It's a very, very different kind of education. Certified or educated, qualified to perform a list of tasks, trained to think broadly and critically about a whole host of matters. If you're certified, you're given the tools to be employed, right? You're given the tools to be employed. You're given the tools to say, okay, I know how to perform this task. Who out there is employing somebody that needs this task? Okay, I can come to you and I can show you I've been certified, and you can put me on your assembly line, and I can perform that task for you, right? When you're certified, you're ready to be employed to fulfill a certain task. When you're educated, you're given the tools to innovate and to influence. You're given the tools to innovate and influence. You're given the tools to walk out and say, okay, I see what everybody's hiring for, but I want to say, what needs to be done? What's the thing that others haven't thought of yet? What's the thing that they're doing in a screwy and stupid way that I actually could fix that and do it far, far better? And who are the people that just haven't figured it out yet that I could compel and influence and direct and lead them in a new way, right? It's a very, very different way about thinking about what you're going to do with your life and what you're going to do with your education. When you're certified, you're ready to follow orders. You've been trained to follow certain steps. But when you're educated, you're ready to give the orders. You're ready to be the one telling people what needs to be done next. You're ready to give the orders. If you're certified, you've been made a hireling, and if you've been educated, you've been made a free man, okay? You see the difference between those two, being the hireling, being the free man, being the free woman. It's great because the Latin word for a free man is liber. I hope you've all caught that much. The Latin word for being a free man is the liber. That's the free man, and that is where we get that name of our educational tradition of the liberal arts, the liberal arts, the skills of being a free man and a free woman. That's what this education is intended to convey. And that education for the liber is the foundation for the liberal arts. It was what was the foundation for the medieval college education. This was the education for the leaders and the shapers of the world up until only the last century. I think this has profound implications for how you live your life as a Christian man or woman. Are you being trained how to follow steps to be qualified for a job, or are you being trained to think critically and communicate persuasively to the glory of God? Okay, which one? And you see, one is a position of following orders, the other is a position of freedom and being able to direct others and go in new directions. But after you've asked that question, let's say you're at your office and you're required to use the new pronoun herm or shim or zowie or whatever the new pronoun is that you're supposed to use. And here's the question: do you need to be employable, or do you need to think critically and lead others? Okay? If all of your training is about teaching you to be employable, then how do you answer that question, that challenge? But if what you've been trained is be a free man, be a free woman, figure out how to go out, change the world, shape the world, direct others, think critically, engage, okay, you're going to answer that very, very differently. So you see how profound the implications are for how we live our Christian life. If the answer is to stay employable, then you are a cog in someone else's machine. You do what is necessary to keep your job on paper while preserving a quiet little space in your heart where you allow yourself to remember the difference between boys and girls. And that is what is so much of our church is doing. They know what they have to say on paper, and they preserve a quiet little spot in their heart to maintain their faithfulness to God. The classical Christian liberal arts tradition aims to show how the whole world coheres in Christ, and it declares that you are the sons and daughters of the King. The free men and women who are raised up by this education are able to go into any sphere and lead. Okay, you go out and you lead. It was interesting. I was meeting with a guy recently who's he made his career as the director of a large network of hospitals in the U.S. And I was talking to him about, how do you get prepared to lead a network of hospitals, to advance yourself through the medical ranks, to be that you start as a doctor, you start as an orderly, whatever, and work your way up. He said, no, I was a philosophy major. No medical degree could have equipped me for that. Philosophy, that's what you needed to understand what it looked like to put that network together. And it's shocking to me how often I'm running into that. People with the liberal arts education that you are providing that foundation for, That is the education that steps into massive positions of cultural leadership. And we're constantly told one story about the path that you have to follow. But if you look at the actual data, you will find that that is just not the case, that there's actually something entirely different that is happening. And I would encourage you to question that narrative when you're told it. So now, make no mistake, vocational training is important. So I don't want to disregard that. When I was a tanker, I was doing what I should have been doing. So there was nothing wrong with that, and I don't want to denigrate that. That was exactly the kind of training I needed to do the job that I was doing. But it's a subset of a much larger educational objective. Just be honest for a moment. If your college education was really simply just about teaching you how to do the work that you currently do at the office, okay, the work you currently do at the office, if your college education was supposed to have taught you that work, how much of your college education was a complete waste? If that's the way it functioned, mine would have been a complete waste. Now, like I said, I still actually value my education because the task of laying out a chemical equation and working through a problem that took a full week to unpack, and 12 pages of scribbled notes of formula and going back and forth to finally get that right answer and realizing you did it wrong 8 times in a row until you finally get the right thing. That skill, though I do not continue working with chemistry in any way, that skill, though, has served me so much. It has helped me as a minister, putting together a sermon with a week of exegeting and trying to figure out how to make this thing work. It has served me as an academic, writing a dissertation that took 4 years to put together, working in all sorts of different languages. The skill that I learned there helped quite a lot, but not in the way that we're pretending that college serves us. It was creating a larger skill, a deeper skill than just the abilities that I was certified for. So most likely you do not have the career that you majored in, and even if you're still in that field, most likely the bulk of the actual expertise that you needed was acquired on the job and not in the classroom. This does not make the 4 years of college a waste of time. It just means that we're evaluating college by completely screwy means. In making jobs the end of education, we've actually radically lowered our expectations for education and have instilled in our graduates a slave mentality rather than the mind of a free man or a free woman. You are not cogs in somebody else's machine. You're the free sons and daughters of the living God who have been commanded to fill and subdue this earth. That's that great creation mandate. Go out, fill and subdue this earth. You don't wait in lines waiting for someone else to approve you and give you a job. Okay? That is not what we're raising these kids to do, to stand in lines and wait for other people to approve them and give them jobs. We are raising them to be the ones that go out and make jobs for others, to go out and figure out the new way of handling this and directing others and persuading others to go in a new direction. And my father-in-law is fond of pointing out that think of the pilgrims coming across the Atlantic as they approached the eastern shore of the U.S., how many jobs were waiting for them? As they climb off the boat and they go and they look, okay, who's hiring, right? Where's the help wanted sign? And if there isn't a help wanted sign and nobody is hiring, are we lost? There's nothing to do, just get back on the boat and go home? No, because they didn't come with that slave mentality. They came as free men and free women. They came to make something. And they didn't need a help wanted sign to figure out what to do. They came to live as free men and women and to settle, to fill, to subdue the land. And that's what each of you are called to do. Not to sit and wait to see who's going to hire you, but to actually go out and create and shape. There was work for those people, but there were no jobs. There was plenty of work. There were no jobs. Free men, and that's where our Pilgrim Fathers were, find work and make jobs for others. And that mentality I really think we need to be instilling in our students, particularly as they think about what they're doing with their lives as they move towards graduation. And when our politicians promise us how many jobs they're going to create for us, we need to understand that we're being treated like hirelings. Our answers needs to be, I don't want you to get me a job. I want you to get out of the way so I can make jobs for others. I want to be somebody who creates in this world. And I would say, just looking at the anecdotal evidence of our own graduates coming out with a liberal arts degree, how much they have created and how well they have done for themselves is just really rewarding to see the kinds of things that they're doing. Now, the last I've given you two freedoms before. Bernie, who said he wanted college to be free, and he's chosen an extremely cheap definition of the word free. Free for him means not having to pick up the tab. But the word free actually has far more profound meanings. Free to believe and obey what Scripture teaches without federal interference. The ability to think like a free man and lead others rather than living like a hireling cog in the machine. Two important freedoms, but let me give you the third freedom. And this is, I think, obviously has to be the most significant. Of all the freedoms, the greatest freedom is obviously the freedom that we have in Christ. As Jesus said, John 8:36, therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. The freedom that we want for all of these kids is for the Son to make them free, because then they are free indeed. And who are those that the Son has made free? Romans 8. There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has made me free from the law of sin and death. When we walk according to the flesh, we are increasingly enslaved. When we walk according to the Spirit, we are free men and women. So it is a very simple question. Are our students graduating from their educational experience, not K to 12, but K to 16, with their freedom increased or their bondage increased? What is happening to them? Do they walk out more free or less free when they are done with school? In particular, do our colleges lead them into greater bondage to the flesh, or do our colleges lead them to Christ? I thought it was an interesting statistic I saw recently that right now as a college student, you're more likely to be smoking pot regularly than tobacco. Where we are in Moscow, Idaho, we're right on the Washington border. With Washington having just legalized pot, we have the road from us to the Pullman airport, an 8-mile road, is now lined with pot farms. And our town's Walmart is right on the Washington border. So you go to Walmart, and then the next door over is our pot store, just a little bit further on. So that is. It used to be a question if you were getting drunk in college. Now it's moved on to just recreational drug use. 1 out of 5 college women will have had an abortion by the time they graduate. Are we making them more free or less when we send them off to college? Parents feel like they've done the necessary work to lay the foundation for their kids, and they send their kids off for final years of training so that they can get a job. And that's how parents are thinking now. They send them off to get a job. And let me just say really quick, as a side note, you have done such an amazing job. I know that there's so much that you have to do. So don't, you all know that you have not arrived yet. You all know the imperfections of your schools. You all know what a mess it is and how much work needs to be done. All of that is true, but step back from a little bit. As somebody who is regularly receiving your graduates, you have done an amazing job. And I will tell you that colleges everywhere are seeing the classical Christian movement as the crop that they want to harvest. You are the pond that everybody wants to fish in. You are the ones that people want, because not every one of your kids is brilliant. You've got all kinds of goofy, weird, I know every class is an assortment of people that only their mother could love, and I get that. But that said, taken as a whole, if I wanted to find some just sort of subsection of the American populace that I wanted to recruit from, as a secular school, as a Christian school, no matter what, it's going to be you. You are churning out well-rounded, really sharp, hardworking kids who are basically moral and have just all of the attributes that's going to be the highest yield as college students. So what I'm saying to you is this is a warning. Colleges are coming after you like crazy, and they're fishing with all kinds of bright and shiny fishing lures. I hope you can see past it, and I hope you can see how much of this is going to undo all of the work that you have done, and how much of it is actually going to build on it and take it somewhere further. I just want you to know that your successes set you up for another test, and I think you've been immensely successful. It's such a blessing to see what you've done. College hasn't gone nearly as far as what you all have done. We've got so much further to go at the college level. But what happens is the recruiters come, and parents want to see the promise that their kid can get a job. But tell me, in your own life, the years 18 to 22, were these insignificant in your character formation? just in your own life, 18 to 22, would you say foundation was laid at 17, everything after that was kind of accessorizing? Or did some pretty significant things happen in your life between 18 to 22? Did anything big for good or for ill happen in those years? With regard to your own understanding of sex, what it is for, what it looks like to keep yourself pure, to honor God with your body, was this an insignificant time in your life? All right? Did nothing happen in there that had left any sort of lasting imprint on you? Or did these years matter greatly? Do those years still loom disproportionately large in your memory for good or for ill? With regard to your faith, was this an insignificant time in your life? Okay? With regard to your seriousness about the gospel, your theological convictions and what it looked like for you to live this out, was this an insignificant period, or did big things happen for you in those years 18 to 22? Was this a period where you came to faith, lost faith, came to a much more understanding of what you believed, maybe even had a significant theological upheaval? Or with regard to your family life, is your current marriage shaped or impacted disproportionately by those few short years that happened? And we could go on and on quite a while like this, but I want you to think about your understanding of what sort of career you want to pursue, what debt you carried with you, where you ended up living, and on and on. Those 4 years of college actually have a disproportionate impact on the rest of your life. And the major question that you need to ask yourself is, did those years leave you freer in Christ, or did they enslave you in ways that took a long time to free yourself? Did they make you free to Christ, or more a slave to the flesh? So let me return to my opening comments. Based on all the various surveys crammed together, on average around 3 out of 4 high school Christian students are no longer Christian by the end of their freshman year. That's, I think, an insanity. But we're stuck in a herd, feeling like this is just what we have to do. Now, oftentimes when you find yourself stuck in an impossible situation, the fact that you don't see a solution out there will keep you from even admitting that there's a problem. Have you ever noticed that? If you can't see the solution, then you can't acknowledge to yourself that there's a problem, and you kind of feel really trapped. But there are actually options out there for the problems I'm describing. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, this is not NSA plug. NSA is one of the options, but you're not the only one. You can find a number of schools that refuse to take the government money. Hillsdale, Grove City, both led the way on this. And now a number of schools are seeing that this is possible. Patrick Henry, they're here with us. A number of other colleges that you'll see represented out here are not taking the federal money. As well as the classical Christian education movement has set, I think, a fantastic trajectory at the K-12 level. And a number of colleges have worked to recover a truly liberal arts, a really free liberal arts curriculum. That's something we're working on with just one undergraduate in liberal arts. Another college, I think, that's doing this really well, Bethlehem College and Seminary in Minneapolis. They have an undergraduate degree that they began underneath their seminary degree that's really doing a lot of the same things that we're doing. And I believe a number of the schools that are out here are really working to do something very similar, or put together like an honors program that does something similar. So you have a whole host of options out there that are kind of countering this professionalization of the undergraduate degree. And I think there are a number of colleges where a real focus on rooting the students in Christ is a true priority for the faculty and the administration. But you have to really work to see that, because the recruitment package always looks shiny, but there's oftentimes a different truth behind the scenes. So I hope that you'll prioritize these things as you think about what college needs to look like. New St. Andrews, as I said, is not the only college doing this. We're just the best ones at it. But there are just a lot of fantastic opportunities out there, and I hope that you can see the implications that this has for the K-12 level and the seriousness of the kinds of decisions that you have already made, because you've set a really important trajectory that we're working to carry on at the college level. But I hope that you do not falter in that trajectory that has been set. So the closing question: has the Son set you free? Then live free indeed. The Son has set you free, then we need to think about being free in all of these different ways in our education. Thank you.